Hi there. Thank you for joining me for another piece discussion video. This time focused on the piece Insomniacs from the series 21st Century Royalty, which itself belongs to the postmodern body of work. 21st Century Royalty explores the kings and queens of our modern era. That is to say, the figures that we admire, the qualities we aspire to attain in the 21st century, and the calamities that befall those hoisted upon the pedestal of celebrity or stardom within the current cultural zeitgeist. For a more comprehensive look at the series, you will find a link to the series overview in the description of this video. Now, let's turn our attention to Insomniacs, beginning with the piece's title. This title is twofold, in that the word insomniacs is being used to represent a dichotomy of meanings, or a double entendre in some ways as well. On one hand, insomniacs refers to those incapable of sleep. It's obviously referring to the figure himself in the piece, as he appears to be suffering from the insomnia. But he functions as a mirror for 21st century society, wherein restlessness is instigated by an endless cycle of seeking momentary relief that only exacerbates the fatigue rather than bringing true sleep. On the other hand, the word insomniacs refers to those who would belong to the city of insomnia would themselves be insomniacs. This is part of the greater metaphor that links this piece and the Court of Insomnia progression of pieces within the series 21st Century Royalty to the video game Final Fantasy XV, and specifically its world, its story, and its characters. In the world of that game, the crown city is known as Insomnia, and so to describe individuals as insomniacs is where the double entendre comes in. On one hand, it's referring to people within the world of Final Fantasy XV. On the other, it's referring to members of our own society, but it's different in terms of why they receive that title. Insomniacs are made so by birthright. As citizens of the city of Insomnia, insomniacs are made by consequence of the lifestyle and culture within the 21st century. With all that said, I want to turn now to the composition of this piece, and it is largely created to represent a sort of flowing circular movement to mimic a vicious cycle. There are juxtapositions of familiar objects and words. Some examples include children's toys. There's allusions to drugs with a needle, with pills, bubbles. What it is essentially is a combination of tangible and digital forms of pleasure, distraction, and or pacification. I wanted to create a sort of domino effect of objects in quick succession. And then within that, we have the figure, who is visibly wound within the circular composition, expressing a bemused look that is both fatigued and agitated at the same time. Also going on here is a bit of absurdity, that what is surrounding the figure seems to be at odds with him. The use of hot pink in particular is meant to be sort of a parodic fashion. It's as though the objects themselves are ridiculing him as he attempts sleep. There's the 24 karat on the pillow, which is a reference to the fact, again, that maybe enough finery or glamour will be enough to induce the sleep as well. On the corners, we have two adornments, and this is also a point where we introduce silver and purple within the overall color palette of 21st Century Royalty, specifically for the Court of Insomnia progression. These sorts of elements of decorum are also intrinsic to the Court of Insomnia in order to establish that sort of royal quality to the work, to the figure himself. The ornaments that are encompassing the words Atrium Insomnia are inspired by late Baroque or early Rococo era architecture. They're highly opulent and lavish in order to express decadence in a celebratory manner. They are donning the color silver. It's infused with an indent-throned blue to evoke a more emphatic and austere appearance. Now, the words themselves, Atrium Insomnia, they're Latin for the Court of Insomnia, or a rough translation therein. That is specifically to highlight the fact that this piece, Insomniacs, is the progenitor for this whole progression. So this was essentially the crown piece amongst these new pieces, the Court of Insomnia 5-piece progression within 21st Century Royalty. I think now is also a good time to mention that I've included a dissection and analysis publication linked in the description of this video as well if you would like to learn more about the Court of Insomnia specifically and how it impacted the overall 21st Century Royalty series. Moving on from that, I want to dive more into the conceptual identity of this piece now. Ultimately, what we have here is a conundrum of being desperate for sleep, yet endlessly wanting. And I want to highlight the fact that insomnia in the modern era is instigated by a constant intake of shallow, temporary solutions that don't actually solve the problem in the long term, but they're more or less just short-term solutions. It's sort of the band-aid for a broken arm metaphor, if you will. There's the cycle of fear and disdain and sort of ironic bitterness in the modern era that I think is accelerated by a consumerist culture that desperately seeks to pacify without ever truly healing. I think things like entertainment, money, drugs, nostalgia, they are distractions that inevitably only intensify one's sleeplessness rather than cure it. And I think that that is something that runs rampant within the 21st century. This, however, is all within a very sympathetic view because I believe that the figure is a victim to this sort of patchwork gratification and hollow convenience cycle. I think that there is a proclivity within the human condition that the modern era exploits, and the exploitation is done in a manner that seems to just agitate and expand that proclivity, again, rather than healing it, ultimately. I think we live in a very highly corporatized era that leverages our tendencies for financial gain, and I think that that's terrifying and also tragic. One of the items in the piece as well is the hand mirror that's held by the figure, and it reflects back a skull emoji, which is meant to represent a memento mori. The mirror is obviously reflecting what is being seen, and if it's reflecting towards the viewer, it's meant to serve as a reminder of the mortality of all of us and sort of the risk that naturally befalls those who get caught in this cycle. Now, with all of that said, I want to turn to the references in this piece because there are quite a few. This piece is overall a myriad of cultural and societal references that both have general and personal significance. So first, there are the emojis utilized, which were contemporaneous with those found on the iOS operating system at the time of this piece's creation. We again, as mentioned, have that skull emoji. There's the rolling on the floor, laughing emoji. There's also the squirt gun emoji, which I deliberately used as a mockery of the fact that the gun emoji had been removed prior to this iOS at some point. I can't remember the exact history of it, but it felt more like a decision made on optics rather than actual social justice, and so that is a slight amount of commentary on my part. There's the boost post icon with the finger pointing at it, which is meant to represent the constant stream of marketing push by social media platforms onto creators. As a matter of fact, while I was producing this piece, I remember seeing that boost post button constantly on social media because I, as a creator, I, as somebody who's trying to utilize social media for my business, am constantly bombarded by the algorithm and by the platforms themselves wanting me to pay into their system in order to help to boost my own content. There's a quote here also that says, "What? They're fake," which is a reference to a line said in the third episode of the anime Fooly Cooly, or FLCL. The theme that is being explored there is the idea of public facade in contrast to substance or depth. And this anime and this connection is something that's very important and dear to me, and again carries a lot of personal sort of emotional significance that is more on the underside of it. It's obviously something that's not able to be perceived by the viewers without that knowledge. The music notes that appear above the figure, they actually play the main theme for Final Fantasy, which is a composition by Nobuo Uematsu and Yoko Shimomura for the game Final Fantasy 15 particularly. And so this is specifically connecting back to that game in an actual tangible sense. There are additional music lyrics that say, "You look so cool" or "gone." These words are from the song Robbers by the 1975. And this is actually a very personal connection. This was a line that I had misheard for many, many years. It wasn't until the time of this piece, when I was actually producing this piece, when I heard the lyric correctly. So the actual line is, "You look so gone." I had always been hearing it as "You look so cool." But ironically, the actual words and my mishearing of them end up reflecting more of the content of my piece in Insomniacs than I'd even realized. Obviously, the idea of "you look so cool" would represent this thought that in the song itself, the people who are undertaking the act of robbery are sort of self-aggrandizing by way of demonstrating that they have some kind of prowess. When in reality, "you look so gone" refers to the fact that this momentary act of excitement that they undertake by being robbers is merely fleeting and going to be followed by a deeper sense of remorse ultimately. And yet again, as all of these other references and items in this piece are mentioning, this is just another example of how there's an emptiness that adds to that sleeplessness and that insomnia, and these sorts of pithy little acts of defiance are merely additional means of trying to pacify those feelings without actually healing them. Now, moving into the Court of Insomnia specifically, the references that are made there, as mentioned, involve this idea that insomniacs are those who belong to the city of Insomnia, which is the crown city within Final Fantasy XV. The protagonist of Final Fantasy XV and his royal retinue, they actually are the royal court of the city of Insomnia, since the prince himself, who is the main character, becomes the king of Insomnia very quickly within the story of the game and of the world. I'm utilizing this literal mark of citizenship within the world of the video game to link to the conceptual citizenship we have as insomniacs within the 21st century due to our way of life. And I think that ultimately sort of settles this whole dynamic that I'm trying to create with the title alone. I think I will stop there for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about this piece, and I hope you'll share it with anybody else who might find it worthwhile. Thank you again, and until the next one, take care, everybody.